I've been a youth services assistant librarian here for 5 years. And one of the things that being a librarian has taught me is that there really is a reader for every single book out there, even the ones that are a little bit strange and maybe a harder sell. So I think when I was writing The Waking Forest, I thought about that reader who really was me, but thinking about the kids who are looking for something kind of a little darker, maybe a little scary, but has a light at the end.
Barrington Area Library is very honored to be interviewing the author of The Waking Forest, Alyssa Wees. Alyssa, can you give us a little synopsis of your best-selling book?
Yeah, so The Waking Forest is about a girl named Rhea who has terrible nightmares and visions that seem real, and a witch who grants wishes to children in the woods, and it is about how their stories kind of come together and collide.
In your youth, who were you inspired by? Parents, teachers, friends, librarians?
Yes. So I was definitely most inspired by my mom. She has always been a huge reader, and she got me into reading at a very young age. And I dedicated the book to her. In the dedication, I say, "For Mama, a good witch," and that's kind of an allusion to The Wizard of Oz. Are you a good witch or a bad witch? Which was one of my favorite movies growing up that I watched with her. I've always been a huge reader of fantasy, so it was natural that I would want to write fantasy as well. Fantasy has always felt more real to me than realistic fiction books in a way, because it lets you explore outside of the boundaries of reality. And I love playing with dreams and magic, and it just, for me, fantasy heightens like life and life experiences, I guess, in a way that realistic fiction doesn't always.
Your cover is very dark. You could almost see the forest breathing in and out. Did you select the picture, or was that someone recommended?
So the way that the cover works is that the publisher decides. I had no say in it, pretty much. They hired an illustrator to do up a sketch, and then they actually did send me the sketch, and I could comment on it, but it seemed like it was more of a, this is what we're doing, what do you think, so it was kind of picked out, and I love it. I feel very fortunate to have the cover that I do.
Now, The Waking Forest, in my opinion, I found was a parallel story.
Yes.
What was your inspiration for it?
Yeah, so with the parallel stories, really, it was just that I had two different characters that I was really interested in writing about, and I kind of thought, how can I connect these into one story? It was really difficult to kind of line them up together, but I think it was really rewarding in that, that moment when they finally come together.
Who were the two characters that you had in your book, in your first part of your book?
Yeah, so the two characters are Rhea, who's the young girl living in what would be considered our world, the real world, who has these nightmares of a forest on the edge of her backyard that disappears when she tries to enter them. And then the other character is the Witch of Wishes, who grants wishes to children in their dreams. So that's kind of the fantasy meets the reality.
When you began this novel, did you have the characters and their stories mapped out, or did the characters take a life onto their own, write their own story?
Yeah, so when I first started it, I really didn't have any idea of where the story was going. I like to find it as I go. So I would say probably the characters wrote the story more than me having any idea beforehand.
How long did it take you to write the novel and to polish this work?
Yeah, so the first draft took about a year to write, and then probably another half a year to edit with my agent. And then, of course, when the publishing house buys it, it was another year to edit. So from the time I started writing to the publishing date, it was about a little less than 4 years.
Okay. That's a good process.
Yeah.
How did using the plethora of literary terms like alliterations, metaphors, similes, advance the storyline? That's one thing that really impressed me, is the beautiful, polished, smooth writing. It was like reading
Thank you.
literature from a bygone day where people really paid attention to their writing style.
Yeah, well, one of the pleasures of writing for me is, of course, telling a story, but I also really love playing with language, and I've always loved poetry, but I'm not much of a poet. The short form kind of intimidates me, so I just love playing around with language, and in the case of this book specifically, I think that using metaphor and certain imagery, it lends to the dreamy kind of atmosphere, as well as like the dark, it can pull out some darkness
Right.
by using kind of dark imagery.
In this book, did you feel that you found your voice in writing? You alluded earlier in another interview that a professor, you were having some issues with writing, and he said you need to find your voice.
Yeah, she told me to trust my voice, and that was probably the best advice I've ever been given, because sometimes I think as a writer, you tend to overthink when you're writing, and the best thing to do is kind of step back and realize that, I've learned so much, and to just kind of let my voice show through. And so I do feel like I did find my voice in writing this book.
What in your book caught the attention of a highly rated New York publisher who not only published it but also marketed? You achieved the dream of so many first novelists. How did you aspire to that standard?
Yeah, so Delacorte published it. I had a wonderful editor that I worked with, and I'm really grateful for the journey. It was a long time coming, and this actually wasn't the first book that I tried to get published. It's actually the second. So, sometimes it just takes a while to get there. But yeah, I don't know, something.
How did you find the publicist? Because many, again, first-time writers, especially even some that we've interviewed in the past, were forced to actually self-publish their book.
Yeah.
So how did you get the process of finding a publisher and having the publisher, I'm not the publisher, but the editor, the book agent, interested in your book, and then delivering it to the various publishers? Tell us a little bit more about that process.
Yeah, so the way to go about traditional publishing is to usually get an agent. So I queried agents, and I found one that I've been with for several years. She's really great, and she was the one who helped me edit the book and polish it before we sent it out to editors. And she did most of the work sending it out, and she sent it to my editor at Delacorte, who loved it and made an offer. So you can find me at my website, alyssawees.com. I'm also on Twitter at Alyssa Wees, and Instagram at Alyssa_Wees. And you can buy the book online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold.